The emergency room at Portland General Hospital had seen everything: gunshot wounds, overdoses, heart attacks. But when 68-year-old James Harrison stumbled through the doors at 2:17 in the morning on September the 15th, 24, clutching his left shoulder and barely conscious, even veteran nurse Linda McCarthy stopped mid-stride and screamed. The sound that tore from her throat wasn't professional. It was primal, because what was growing on Jim Harrison's back shouldn't have been possible. The mass protruding through his torn flannel shirt was the size of a softball, pulsing with visible veins, its surface mottled purple and red like something rotting from the inside out. Sarah Bennett ordered an immediate CT scan, her hands steady despite the ice flooding her veins. When the images appeared on screen 30 minutes later, she whispered a single question to the empty radiology room. How is he still alive? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Along with the city you're watching from now, let's continue with the story. James Harrison had built bridges that would outlast him by a century. The Fremont Bridge renovations in 2003, the Columbia River Highway expansion that cut commute times by 40 minutes, structures of steel and concrete that bore the weight of thousands of lives every single day, never buckling, never failing. He was 6'1", or had been before age rounded his shoulders. Silver hair cropped military short despite never serving. Hands calloused from 4 decades of construction work, scarred from 100 minor accidents, he'd never bothered getting stitched. His eyes were pale blue, the kind that seemed to look through you rather than at you, always calculating load-bearing capacity, stress points, structural integrity. Born in 1956 in Portland, Oregon, Jim had learned early that men who built things didn't complain about them. His father, Thomas Harrison, came back from Korea in 1953 with a Purple Heart he kept in a drawer, and memories he kept locked deeper. Thomas taught his son exactly 2 lessons: work hard and shut up about it. When Thomas died alone in a VA hospital bed in 1987, Jim hadn't visited in 3 years. He told himself it was because his father preferred it that way. Jim wore blue flannel shirts exclusively, always long-sleeved. Even in August, when Portland hit 90 degrees, always buttoned to the collar. He owned 47 of them, identical except for varying degrees of wear. His wife, Rachel, had stopped asking why years ago. Rachel Thompson Harrison was 66, retired from teaching 2nd grade after 40 years of shaping young minds with patience Jim had never quite understood. She was 5'6", with silver blonde hair she wore in a practical bob, reading glasses on a beaded chain, and a habit of wearing cardigans even indoors. They'd married in 1970 when she was 21 and he was 23, and she'd spent 45 years learning to interpret his silences. She was a breast cancer survivor, diagnosed in 2000 with stage 2. She'd endured 8 months of chemotherapy that left her weak and nauseated, while Jim worked double shifts to pay the bills their insurance wouldn't cover. She'd been in remission since 2007. It was the closest they'd ever come to losing each other, or so Rachel had thought. Their daughter, Dr. Emily Harrison Brooks, was 40 years old and practiced environmental law in Seattle, Yale Law School, class of 2008. Sharp-minded, sharp-tongued, with her father's pale blue eyes and her mother's gentle hands, she'd learned to keep hidden behind professional armor. She'd been married from 2012 to 2021, divorced because she'd somehow married a man exactly like her father, emotionally unavailable, incapable of vulnerability, allergic to the word help. Emily hadn't spoken to Jim in 2 years. September 14th, 11:47 at night, the radio in the Harrison kitchen played softly. An oldies station Jim had favored for decades. Sam Cooke's voice drifted through the small dining room where Rachel had set the table with her good china, the set they had received as a wedding gift 45 years ago, and used maybe a dozen times since. Pot roast, Jim's favorite, roasted carrots and potatoes, the way his mother used to make before she died in '98. Rachel had spent 3 hours preparing it, though she knew he probably wouldn't eat much. He never did any more. "Happy anniversary," Rachel said, raising her wine glass. She'd poured herself Merlot, Jim his usual water. He hadn't touched alcohol since 2003, after a doctor casually mentioned his liver enzymes were elevated. That was the last time Jim had seen a doctor for anything. 45 years, Jim said. His voice was rough, like gravel under towers. Best 45 years of my life. Rachel smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She'd been smiling that way for 15 years. Jim cut into his pot roast, brought a small piece to his mouth, chewed mechanically. Rachel watched him the way she'd learned to watch him, cataloging the small tells, the way he held his fork in his right hand only, never his left, the way he sat slightly twisted in his chair, right shoulder forward, the way his jaw clenched every time he swallowed, as if the simple act of eating required tremendous concentration. "You Send Me" came on the radio, their song, the song that had been playing the night Jim proposed at the Columbia River Gorge in 1979, sunset painting the water gold, Jim down on one knee with a ring that cost him 3 months' wages. Rachel's eyes welled up. Jim reached for the coffee pot. His left arm simply stopped working. One moment it was extending toward the pot. The next, it was falling, lifeless, and the pot was slipping from the counter, and Jim was lurching forward, and the ceramic shattered against the tile floor in an explosion of hot coffee and broken pieces. Jim went down hard, catching himself on the table edge with his right arm. The impact sent the good china sliding. A plate crashed to the floor, then another. "Jim!" Rachel was up around the table, hands reaching for him. He batted her away with his right hand. "I'm fine. Just clumsy." "You're not fine." Her voice had an edge Rachel rarely used, the teacher voice that meant, "Sit down and listen. Let me see." "Rachel, I said I'm fine." She grabbed his left shoulder. Jim screamed. It wasn't a yell or a shout. It was a scream, raw and animal, the sound of something breaking that had been holding together by pure force of will for far too long. He collapsed fully then, knees hitting the floor, right hand clutching the table edge, whole body shaking. Rachel stumbled backward, hand to her mouth, because when she grabbed his shoulder, even through the thick flannel, she'd felt it, something huge, something wrong, something that moved under her palm like it was alive. "Jim?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "What is that?" He was breathing hard, head down, wouldn't look at her. "Nothing." "That's not nothing, Jim. Look at me. What is that?" "It's nothing, Rachel. Just drop it." "How long?" The question came out sharp as broken glass. "How long has that been there?" Silence. Just Sam Cooke singing about honest he'd be, and Jim Harrison kneeling in coffee and broken china. and 45 years of marriage cracking like the plates on the floor. Jim, how long? He finally looked up at her. His pale blue eyes were wet. Rachel had seen Jim cry exactly 3 times in 45 years. Their wedding day, the day Emily was born, the day Rachel's cancer diagnosis came back positive. 21 years, he whispered. The floor seemed to tilt under Rachel's feet. 21 years. 21 years of blood on his shirts she'd washed without comment. 21 years of him flinching when she touched his left side. 21 years of separate bedrooms because he claimed he snored too loud. 21 years of her choosing not to see what was right in front of her. Her hand found the wall phone. She was dialing 911 before Jim could protest. "Don't," he said. "Rachel, don't." "What's your emergency?" the dispatcher asked. Rachel's voice was steady as steel. "My husband collapsed. There's something on his shoulder. It's enormous. Please send help." The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. Paramedic Jake Morrison had been running emergency calls in Portland for 15 years. He'd seen bodies pulled from the Willamette River after 3 weeks. He'd scraped teenagers off highway pavement. He'd pronounced a 4-year-old dead from parental neglect. But when he cut away Jim Harrison's flannel shirt in the back of the ambulance, his hands stopped moving. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. The mass on Jim's left shoulder blade was the size of a softball, maybe larger. The skin stretched over it was translucent, mottled purple and deep red, with veins spiderwebbing across the surface like cracks in old porcelain. It pulsed visibly with Jim's heartbeat. In the harsh LED light of the ambulance, Morrison could see fluid moving beneath the skin, dark shapes that shouldn't exist in human tissue. "How long?" Morrison asked, pressing gauze over the area where the shirt had stuck to weeping flesh. 21 years? Rachel said from her seat beside Jim. Her voice was hollow. Morrison's partner, Sarah Chen, was already radioing ahead. "Portland General, this is Medic to 12. We're inbound with a 68-year-old male, large mass on left posterior thorax, possible necrotizing fasciitis, possible tumor rupture. Patient is conscious and alert, but in severe distress. ETA 6 minutes. Jim's vitals were frightening. Blood pressure 160 over 105, heart rate 132, temperature 101.8. All signs of a body at war with itself. "Sir, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much pain are you in?" Morrison asked. "I've had worse," Jim said through clenched teeth. "That's not an answer." 7! Yeah, Morrison had been a paramedic long enough to know that when a man who'd lived with something for 21 years said 7, he meant 9 or 10. He increased the oxygen flow and started an IV line for fluids. Rachel held Jim's right hand the entire ride. She didn't say a word. She'd said everything she needed to say when she dialed 911. Portland General's emergency room at 2:17 in the morning was never quiet. But when Jim Harrison was wheeled in on a gurney, a pocket of silence spread like a ripple. Nurse Linda McCarthy, 28 years in emergency medicine, took one look at the mass visible through the gauze and screamed before she could stop herself. The sound triggered immediate response. Dr. Sarah Bennett, the attending physician, rushed over. 2 other nurses converged. A resident who'd been suturing a drunk driver's forehead abandoned his patient mid-stitch. "Get him to Trauma Bay 2, Dr. Bennett ordered. I want a CT scan stat, full metabolic panel, coag studies, type and cross for 4 units, and somebody page Stevens from radiology. Tell him I don't care if he's asleep. Jim was transferred to a hospital bed under the fluorescent lights. The mass looked even worse. Dr. Bennett carefully removed the gauze, and even her experienced hands hesitated. "Mr. Harrison, I need to examine this," she said. "It's going to hurt. Everything hurts," Jim said. She pressed gently around the edges of the mass. The skin was hot to the touch, at least 103 degrees. The tissue beneath was hard in some places, disturbingly soft in others. When she pressed on the inferior edge, a small amount of bloody fluid seeped from what looked like a fissure in the skin. Jim's entire body went rigid, but he didn't make a sound. "Mr. Harrison, how long have you known about this?" 21 years. Dr. Bennett had been an emergency physician for 12 years. She'd learned to keep her expression neutral, no matter what she saw. But 21 years shattered that neutrality. "You've had this mass for 21 years and never sought treatment. Didn't seem important. Didn't seem—" She stopped herself. "Have you seen a doctor at all in that time?" "Not since 2003. Rachel, standing in the corner of the trauma bay, let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "He went to the doctor in 2003 because I made him. They told him his cholesterol was high. He never went back." Dr. Stevens writhed. Gray hair standing on end, wearing sweatpants under his white coat. One look at Jim's shoulder, and he was fully awake. "Get him to CT now," he said. "I want 3-millimeter cuts, full contrast study, and somebody call vascular surgery. If this thing has invaded any major vessels—" He didn't finish the sentence. The CT scan took 40 minutes. Jim lay perfectly still inside the machine. The rhythmic thumping and whirring surrounding him like mechanical heartbeats. Rachel sat in the waiting area, hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. At 3:30 in the morning, her phone rang. Emily's name on the screen. "Mom, is everything okay? You called at midnight and didn't leave a message. You never call that late." Rachel's voice finally broke. "Your father's in the hospital. You need to come home. What happened?" "He's been hiding something for 21 years. He's dying. Emily, he's dying. And he never told us." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Emily's voice, tight and controlled. The lawyer voice she used when emotions threatened to overwhelm. "I'm booking a flight. I'll be there by tonight. Emily, I'm coming home. Mom, I should have come home 2 years ago." The CT scan images appeared in Michael Stevens' computer screen at 4:15 in the morning, and for the first time in his 30-year career as a radiologist, he had to step away from his desk and take 3 deep breaths before he could continue reading. The tumor was massive, 12 centimeters in diameter, roughly the size of a large orange. But size wasn't the shocking part. Stevens had seen larger tumors. What made his hand shake as he manipulated the 3-dimensional reconstruction was how deeply it had integrated itself into Jim Harrison's anatomy. The mass had grown around the scapula, sending finger-like projections into the bone itself. It had wrapped around the subclavian artery like a python constricting its prey. Tendrils extended into the brachial plexus, the network of nerves controlling the entire left arm. The superior edge pressed against the apex of the lung, and throughout the tumor, dark pockets indicated necrotic tissue, dead cells breaking down and releasing toxins into the bloodstream. Stevens picked up the phone and called to David Walsh, the hospital's chief thoracic surgeon. "Dave, I need you to come in. Now." "Mike, it's 4 in the morning. I know what time it is. I have a patient with a desmoid tumor that's been growing for 21 years. It's inoperable by any conventional measure, but if we don't operate, he's dead in months, maybe weeks." Walsh was silent for a moment. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. By 9 o'clock that morning, Jim Harrison was sitting in a hospital bed in room 412, wearing a thin gown that revealed just how much weight he'd lost. Rachel sat in the chair beside him, still wearing the dress she'd put on for their anniversary dinner. Neither had slept. Bennett knocked softly before entering, followed by Dr. Stevens and Walsh. The surgeon was a tall man in his mid-50s with steady hands and eyes that had seen the inside of more human bodies than most people could imagine. "Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Harrison, I'm Dr. Walsh. I've reviewed your CT scan, and I need to be very direct with you about what we're dealing with." He pulled up the 3-dimensional reconstruction on a tablet, rotating it slowly. The tumor looked like something alien, something that shouldn't exist inside a living person. "This is a desmoid tumor, also called aggressive fibromatosis. It's technically benign, which means it won't spread to other organs like cancer does. But benign is a misleading term in this case. This tumor is locally aggressive. It invades surrounding tissue, wraps around vital structures, and destroys everything in its path." Rachel's hand found Jim's. He didn't pull away. "Your tumor has invaded your shoulder blade, wrapped around your subclavian artery, and extended into the brachial plexus. These are the nerves that control your entire left arm. It's also compressing the apex of your left lung, which is why you've been experiencing shortness of breath." "I haven't been short of breath," Jim said. Walsh fixed him with a look. "Mr. Harrison, lying to me won't help anyone. Your oxygen saturation is 92%. Normal is 98 to 100. You've been compensating for reduced lung function for so long you don't remember what normal breathing feels like." Jim said nothing. "Surgery is your only option." Walsh continued, "But I need you to understand the risks. The tumor is wrapped around your subclavian artery. If that artery ruptures during removal, you could bleed to death in minutes. The tumor has also invaded the brachial plexus. Removing it will require cutting through or around those nerves. There's a 40% chance you'll lose all function in your left arm. Permanent paralysis." Rachel's grip on Jim's hand tightened. "The surgical mortality rate for a tumor this extensive is approximately 15%. That means there's a 15% chance you won't survive the operation. And even if the surgery is successful, desmoid tumors have a 60% recurrence rate within 5 years. It could grow back." "And if I don't have surgery?" Jim asked. Walsh didn't soften his delivery. "The tumor is degrading. See these dark areas on the scan? That's necrotic tissue. Dead cells. When enough of the tumor dies, it will rupture. Given the position around your subclavian artery, Rupture means catastrophic bleeding. You'll have maybe 90 seconds before you lose consciousness. 2 to 3 minutes before brain death. How long do I have? Best case scenario, 2 years. More realistically, 18 months. The tumor has been growing slowly for 2 decades, but growth is accelerating now. You've lost almost 30 pounds in the last year. The tumor is consuming resources your body needs to survive. The room was silent, except for the soft beeping of monitors and the distant sound of a hospital PA system announcing a code somewhere on another floor. "I need to think about it," Jim said finally. "Dad," Emily's voice from the doorway made everyone turn. She stood there in jeans and a wrinkled blouse, her hair pulled back, her eyes red-rimmed from crying on the airplane. She'd landed at PDX at 6:30 and taken a taxi straight to the hospital. Jim's face went pale. "Pumpkin! Don't call me that." Emily stepped into the room, her lawyer composure barely holding. "Don't you dare call me that!" "Emily!" Rachel stood, reaching for her daughter, but Emily moved past her to the foot of Jim's bed. 21 years, Emily said, her voice shaking. "You've had this thing killing you for 21 years, and you never said a word." "It's my body, my choice, your choice." Emily's voice rose. "You don't get to choose to die without giving us a chance to save you." "Emily, that's enough," Rachel said softly. "No, it's not enough." Emily turned to her mother. "Did you know?" Rachel's silence was answer enough. "Oh, my God. You knew? How long?" 15 years. Rachel whispered. "I found blood on his shirts. He told me it was nothing. I believed him because I wanted to believe him." Emily looked between her parents, understanding flooding her face with something like disgust. "You both just pretended. For 15 years, you pretended everything was fine." "We didn't—" Rachel started. "Yes, you did. You both did. And now he's dying, and you're still pretending." Emily grabbed her bag. "I can't do this. I need air." She was gone before anyone could stop her. Dr. Walsh cleared his throat. "I'll give you time to discuss this as a family, but Mr. Harrison, you need to make a decision soon. Every day increases the risk." After the doctors left, Rachel and Jim sat in heavy silence. "You should go after her," Jim said. "She needs time. She hates me." Rachel looked at her husband, really looked at him. For the first time in years, she saw the gray pallor of his skin, the way his hospital gown hung on his frame, the careful way he held himself, protecting that left side even now. "She doesn't hate you," Rachel said. "She's terrified. We both are." "I'm scared, Rachel." The admission came out barely above a whisper. "I know." "Not of dying. I've made peace with dying. I'm scared of becoming a burden, of losing my arm and needing you to feed me, dress me, wipe me like a child." Rachel stood and moved to sit on the edge of his bed. She took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You already are a burden," she said. "You have been for 21 years. The burden of silence, the burden of watching you suffer and not being allowed to help, the burden of lying to our daughter every time she asked why you were so distant." Tears tracked down Jim's weathered face. "I'm sorry. I know you are, but sorry doesn't fix this. Only you can fix this by choosing to fight." Emily found her way to the hospital chapel on the second floor. It was a small, non-denominational space with simple wooden pews and stained glass windows that caught the morning light. She sat in the back row and finally let herself cry. She cried for the father she'd never really known, for all the time she'd tried to earn his approval and received only silence, for her law school graduation that he'd missed without explanation, for her wedding, where he'd walked her down the aisle with his face tight with pain she'd interpreted as disapproval, for her divorce that he'd called a weakness when she'd finally worked up the courage to tell him. She cried because she'd spent 2 years angry at a man who'd been dying the entire time. Her phone buzzed, a text from her ex-husband. "Heard about your dad. I'm sorry. If you need anything, call me." She almost laughed. Her ex-husband, the man she'd married specifically because he was nothing like her father, reaching out with more compassion than Jim had shown in 40 years. Except that wasn't true. Was it Jim had shown compassion? He'd worked double shifts when Rachel had cancer. He'd paid for Emily's Yale tuition without complaint. He'd built her a treehouse when she was 7, despite it clearly causing him pain to climb the ladder. He'd shown love the only way he knew how, through action, not words, through sacrifice, not vulnerability. And that's what the tumor was. Emily suddenly realized, not just a medical condition, it was a physical manifestation of everything her father had swallowed, every pain he'd refused to acknowledge, every emotion he'd suppressed for 68 years. Her father had been in pain her entire life, every hug she'd given him as a child, every time he'd picked her up or carried her on his shoulders, every handshake, every pat on the back, every moment of physical affection. He'd endured pain rather than admit weakness. The chapel door opened. Rachel entered, looking a decade older than she had 24 hours ago. "He wants to refuse surgery," Rachel said, sitting beside her daughter. "He's going to refuse and die within 2 years, and I don't know how to change his mind." Emily wiped her eyes. "Then we don't change his mind. We give him a reason to change it himself." "How?" Emily stood. "By showing him what he'll miss if he gives up now." Emily didn't return to Jim's hospital room that day. Instead, she drove to her parents' house in her rental car, using the key she'd kept on her keychain for 2 years despite swearing she'd never come back. The house looked the same. Small, ranch-style home built in 1970, the year before her parents married, white siding that needed painting. The maple tree in the front yard that Jim had planted when Emily was born, now 40 feet tall. The mailbox Jim had built from leftover materials from the Fremont Bridge project, still standing straight after 23 years. Inside, everything was frozen in time. The same furniture, the same photographs on the mantel, Emily as a baby, Emily's high school graduate dawn, a gap where her wedding photo had been, removed after the divorce. She went to her old bedroom first. It had been converted to a sewing room for Rachel's quilting, but her childhood desk remained in the corner. Emily opened the drawers systematically. Old school papers, a diary from age 13 with a broken lock, letters from college, and underneath it all, a box of photographs. Emily, sorting through them, pulled out every picture of herself with Jim. There were more than she remembered. Jim holding newborn Emily in the hospital, his face soft with wonder. Jim teaching 5-year-old Emily to ride a bike, running behind her with his hand on the seat. Jim at her 8th grade science fair, standing behind her project on bridge engineering, pride barely visible in his stoic expression. In every photograph where physical contact was involved. Jim was angled slightly away, his left side always protected, always guarded. She'd thought he didn't want to touch her. She'd been wrong. Emily moved to the master bedroom next. She stood at the threshold for a long moment before entering. It felt like trespassing, but she pushed the door open anyway. The room was neat. Made bed, Rachel's quilting magazine stacked on her nightstand. Jim's side was sparse. A lamp, a glass of water, a worn copy of The Bridge Builder's Manual from 1982. Emily opened Jim's closet. 47 blue flannel shirts hung in perfect rows, organized by degree of wear. Emily pulled one out, held it up to the light. There, on the left shoulder, faint brown stains that washing couldn't fully remove. She checked another shirt, same stains, another, all of them. 21 years of blood, laundered away, but never truly gone. Emily's hands were shaking as she checked shirt pockets. In the 33rd shirt, she found a folded piece of paper, an appointment reminder from 2004. Robert Chen, General Practice, recommended biopsy of shoulder mass. Patient declined further investigation. In another pocket, a card from 2008. Different doctor, same recommendation. Patient never returned. The pattern repeated through 2011, 2010, 2018. Jim had seen doctors, multiple doctors. All had told him the same thing. All had been ignored. Emily sat on her parents' bed and called her mother. He knew, Emily said when Rachel answered. He didn't just ignore it. He was told repeatedly to get it checked. He chose this. Rachel was quiet for a moment. I know. You know, Mom. He actively chose to die rather than face treatment. I know. Emily, why do you think I've been so angry? Not at the tumor. At him? For choosing this? For choosing silence over life? Emily ended the call and moved to the garage. Jim's workspace, untouched since his retirement. Tools organized with military precision. Plans for projects he'd never complete rolled up in PVC tubes. And in the corner, a metal toolbox with a master lock. Emily found Jim's keychain in Rachel's purse, still at the hospital. She drove back, retrieved it without entering his room, and returned to the house. The smallest key on the ring opened the lock. The first layer of the toolbox contained normal items: screwdrivers, wrenches, measuring tape. Emily lifted the top tray. Underneath, a leather journal. Emily opened it to the first page. June 15, 2004. Noticed a lump on my left shoulder blade after the accident at the Morrison Bridge site. Doctor says it could be nothing, but wants to biopsy. I said no. Rachel just finished her cancer treatment. I can't put her through worrying about me, too. It's probably nothing anyway. Emily's hands trembled as she flipped through pages. Entry every few weeks for 21 years, Jim had documented everything. The growth of the tumor measured with calipers. Pain levels on a scale of 1 to 10. Days, he'd almost told Rachel. Days, he'd almost told Emily. March 15, 2009. Emily called today. She's getting married. I wanted to tell her I'm proud. I wanted to tell her about the tumor. I wanted to ask her to come home before I die, but the words wouldn't come. I said, that's nice, honey, and hung up. I am a coward. The tumor is now 9 centimeters. Pain is 8-10 today. Started drinking more to sleep. November 3rd, 2020. Emily called. She's getting divorced. She sounded destroyed. She said, "I married someone just like you, Dad. Someone who can't communicate. Someone who thinks being strong means being silent." I didn't know what to say. I still don't. She's right. I taught her this. The tumor is 10 centimeters. Pain is 8 to 10. Some days I wish it would just kill me and end this. December 3rd, 2023. Bought a gun today. A .38 revolver. I've been thinking about this for months. The tumor is 11 centimeter now. I can barely lift my left arm. Rachel thinks I have arthritis. Emily hasn't called in 6 months. What's the point of continuing? I'm already dead. I just haven't stopped breathing yet. Emily lifted the second tray. The revolver was there, fully loaded. Next to it, a sealed envelope addressed to Rachel and Emily in Jim's careful handwriting. Emily opened it with shaking hands. Rachel, Emily, if you're reading this, I finally found the courage I've lacked for 68 years. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger. I'm sorry I let fear control every decision. I'm sorry I taught Emily that love means shallow when it should mean honesty. I'm sorry I wasted the last 20 years of our marriage hiding instead of living. Rachel, you deserved a husband who could tell you he loved you every day, not one who showed it by slowly killing himself. Emily, you deserved a father who could say, "I'm proud of you," instead of one who demonstrated pride through absence. I don't want to be a burden. I love you both more than I ever said, more than I was capable of saying. I hope you can forgive me, Jim. The letter was dated December 3rd, 2023. 9 months ago, Jim had written a suicide note and then lived 9 more months, carrying a loaded gun and the tumor and the weight of everything unsaid. Emily photographed every page of the journal, every entry. She photographed the medical appointment cards, the suicide note, the loaded gun. She put everything back exactly as she'd found it, locked the toolbox, and drove back to the hospital. It was 8 o'clock at night when she entered Jim's room. He was awake, staring at the ceiling. Rachel had gone home to shower and change. They were alone. "I went to the house," Emily said without preamble. "I found your toolbox." Jim's face went white. 21 years of journal entries. I read every single one. Emily pulled out her phone, opened the photos. "You documented everything, the growth, the pain, the days you almost told us, the days you wanted to die." "Emily, I read the suicide note. Dad, December 3rd? You were going to kill yourself. You wrote the note. You loaded the gun, and then you didn't do it. Why?" Jim's eyes were wet. "Because I'm a coward." "No." Emily moved closer. "You're not a coward. You're terrified. There's a difference." She sat on the edge of his bed, exactly where Rachel had sat that morning. "You wrote that I married someone like you, someone who can't communicate. You were right. I did. And I divorced him because I didn't want to spend my life the way Mom spent hers, waiting for words that never come, loving someone who's physically present but emotionally gone." Jim looked away. "But here's what I realized today. You were never gone. You were right there, in pain, every single day of my life, every hug, every time you picked me up, every moment you showed up, even when it hurt. You were there. You just couldn't tell me. I didn't want you to see me weak. I don't need you to be strong. Dad, I need you to be here, really here. And that means surgery. It means fighting. It means being vulnerable enough to let us help you. Jim finally met her eyes. What if I die on that table? Then you die fighting instead of hiding. But Dad, I don't think you're going to die. I think you've been surviving this for 21 years because you're stronger than you've ever given yourself credit for. Jim agreed to surgery on September 22nd, but Dr. Walsh wanted to wait. The tumor was inflamed from the acute episode, and operating in that state increased the already substantial risks. They needed the inflammation to subside first. 2 weeks minimum, Walsh said. We'll monitor you daily. If the tumor shows signs of rupture, we go in immediately. Otherwise, we wait for optimal conditions. Those 2 weeks became a peculiar kind of limbo. Jim remained in the hospital, tethered to monitors and IV lines, pumping antibiotics to fight the infection brewing in the necrotic tissue. Emily took a leave of absence from her Seattle law firm and moved into her childhood bedroom. Rachel divided her time between the hospital and home, bringing Jim homemade meals he could barely eat. On September 25th, Jim spiked a fever of 103.6. His blood pressure dropped dangerously low. The tumor had grown another 8 millimeters in 3 days. Dr. Walsh called an emergency meeting in Jim's room at 11 o'clock that night. We're out of time, he said, pulling up the latest CT scan. The necrotic core is expanding rapidly. I can see active breakdown of tissue here and here. If we don't operate within the next 48 hours, the tumor will rupture on its own. Then operate, Jim said, his voice hoarse from fever. Mr. Harrison, you need to understand what you're facing. At this size, with this level of inflammation, the risks are significantly higher than what I quoted you before. Surgical mortality is now closer to 25%. Paralysis risk is over 50%, and that's if everything goes perfectly. And if you don't operate, you have days, maybe a week. Rachel, sitting beside Jim's bed, made a sound like something breaking. Emily stood by the window, arms crossed, jaw tight. There's one other option, Walsh continued carefully. We've had some success with a newer protocol, low-dose chemotherapy combined with targeted radiation. It won't cure the tumor, but it might shrink it enough to make surgery safer. The problem is, it takes months to see results. How many months? Emily asked. 3 to 4, minimum. He doesn't have 3 months, Rachel said. We could try an accelerated protocol, more aggressive treatment over 6 to 8 weeks. But the side effects would be severe: nausea, fatigue, immune suppression, and there's no guarantee it would work fast enough. Jim looked at Rachel, then at Emily. Both women stared back at him, and in their eyes he saw something he hadn't seen in years. Hope. Desperate, fragile hope that he might choose to fight instead of fade. How long do I have to decide? Jim asked. 24 hours, Walsh said. After that, the decision will be made for us. That night, Jim couldn't sleep. The fever made everything sharp and surreal. He stared at the ceiling tiles and counted the holes in them, 873 visible from his bed. He'd counted them 17 times in the past week. At 3 in the morning, Rachel appeared in the doorway. She'd gone home to sleep but clearly hadn't managed it. She wore sweatpants and one of Jim's old flannel shirts, and her hair was loose around her shoulders in a way he hadn't seen in decades. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Fever." She came and sat in the chair she'd claimed as her own. Over the past week, for a long moment, they just looked at each other. "I'm scared, Rachel." "I know." "Not of dying, of living and being less than I was, of you having to take care of me like an invalid." Rachel reached over and took his hand. "Jim Harrison, you've been less than you were for 21 years. You've been a man hiding inside silence. And I've loved you anyway. If surgery leaves you with one working arm, I'll still love you. If it leaves you paralyzed, I'll still love you. But if you choose to die without fighting, I don't know if I can forgive that." Dr. Jennifer Parker arrived at Portland General on September 27th. She was a psychologist who specialized in psychosomatic medicine, the intersection of mental and physical health. Dr. Walsh had called her in as a last resort. "Mr. Harrison," she said, settling into the chair beside his bed, "I've reviewed your case. I'd like to propose something unconventional." Jim, exhausted from another sleepless night, barely looked at her. "I'm listening." "Desmoid tumors are strange. They're not cancer, but they behave aggressively. Recent research suggests they're linked to chronic stress and unresolved trauma. Cortisol, your stress hormone, promotes inflammation. Inflammation feeds tumor growth. You're saying stress caused this." "I'm saying stress has been feeding it for 21 years. Your body has been at war with itself since 2004. The question is, what happens if we end that war?" Emily, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner, leaned forward. "What are you proposing?" "An integrative protocol, low-dose chemotherapy and radiation, yes, but also intensive psychotherapy, daily sessions, family therapy 3 times a week. The goal is to address the emotional trauma that's been fueling the physical disease." Jim almost laughed. "You think talking about my feelings will shrink a tumor?" Parker didn't flinch. "I think 21 years of suppressed emotion created an environment in your body where this tumor could thrive. Your immune system has been compromised by chronic stress. If we can reduce that stress, your body might be able to do what it's been trying to do all along, fight back." "That's not real medicine," Jim said. "Actually, it is. There are dozens of peer-reviewed studies showing the connection between chronic stress and disease progression. The mind and body aren't separate." "Mr. Harrison, they never have been." Rachel spoke up. "What do we have to lose?" Dr. Parker pulled up a chart on her tablet. "I've consulted with Dr. Walsh. Here's what I'm proposing. We start treatment immediately, methotrexate and vinblastine, low doses to minimize side effects, targeted radiation 5 days a week, and every day you meet with me for 1 hour, no exceptions. For how long? We reassess in 6 weeks. If the tumor hasn't responded, we proceed with surgery immediately. If it has responded, we continue treatment and hope for enough shrinkage to make surgery safer." Dr. Walsh entered the room. "I've agreed to this protocol on one condition. We monitor you constantly. The moment the tumor shows signs of rupture, we operate No delays, no negotiations. Jim looked at Rachel. Her eyes were pleading. He looked at Emily, who nodded slowly. "Okay," he said finally. "We'll try it your way." Treatment began that afternoon. The chemotherapy made Jim nauseous within hours. The radiation sessions were short but left him exhausted. But the therapy sessions were the hardest part. Dr. Parker didn't ease him into it. The first session, she asked him to describe his earliest memory of pain. Jim sat in silence for 20 minutes. "Silence is a choice," Dr. Parker said gently. "You've been making that choice for 68 years. But silence doesn't protect you. It's killing you." Jim's hands clenched on the armrests of his chair. "I was 7. I fell off my bike and broke my wrist. My father told me to stop crying or he'd give me something to cry about." "Did you stop?" "Yes. And did you ever cry again?" "Not until 3 days ago." The admission came out barely above a whisper. Dr. Parker made a note. "You've been in pain your entire life, haven't you? Not just physical pain, emotional pain. Men don't talk about that." "Who taught you that?" "My father, his father, every man I ever knew." "Your father was in Korea, correct?" Jim nodded. "He came back different. My mother said so. He never talked about it. Never talked about anything that mattered. When he died in 1987, I hadn't seen him in 3 years. I told myself he preferred it that way." "Did he?" "I don't know. I never asked." The sessions continued daily. On October 1st, Dr. Parker brought Rachel into the session. "Mrs. Harrison, when did you first notice the tumor?" Rachel's hands twisted in her lap. "About 15 years ago. I was doing laundry and found blood on his shirt. When I asked him about it, he said he'd scraped his shoulder at work. I believed him because I wanted to." "And when did you stop believing him?" "I never stopped. I just started pretending I believed him. There's a difference." Dr. Parker turned to Jim. "Did you know she knew?" "I suspected, but you never talked about it." "What was there to say? I'd already made my choice." "Your choice," Dr. Parker repeated. "Let's talk about that. Why did you choose to hide this for 21 years? Jim was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw. "Because I couldn't be weak. My whole life, I was the strong one. I built bridges. I provided for my family. When Rachel got cancer, I worked 70-hour weeks to pay the bills. That's what men do. We carry the weight. We don't complain. Even when the weight is killing you. Especially then," Rachel let out a sob. "I never asked you to do that. I never wanted you to destroy yourself for me." "I know, but I didn't know how else to love you." The next session included Emily. It was October 5th, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut. "Emily," Dr. Parker began, "tell your father how his silence affected you." Emily's jaw was tight. "I spent my entire childhood thinking I wasn't good enough. Every achievement, every success. I was trying to get him to notice me, to tell me he was proud, and he never did." Jim's eyes filled. "I was proud. I just didn't know how to say it." "Then why didn't you learn? Why didn't you try?" "Because I learned from my father that men don't say those things. We show them through action." "But I didn't need actions. Dad, I needed words. I needed to hear that you loved me, that I mattered." "You always mattered. You were the most important thing in my life." "Then why did you choose to die? Why did you choose this tumor over me?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Jim opened his mouth, but no words came. Dr. Parker spoke softly. "Mr. Harrison, that's the real question, isn't it? Not why did you ignore the tumor, but why did you choose death over vulnerability?" Jim's face crumpled. For the second time in his adult life, he wept, because being vulnerable felt like dying, and actual dying felt easier. Emily crossed the room and knelt beside her father's chair. She took his hand, the gesture awkward but genuine. "It's not easier, Dad. Not for the people you leave behind." On October 15th, 3 weeks into treatment, Dr. Walsh ordered a follow-up CT scan. The tumor had shrunk, not dramatically, but measurably, from 12 centimeters to 11.3 centimeters, a 6% reduction. Dr. Walsh pulled up the comparison images, frowning. "This shouldn't be happening yet. Chemotherapy typically takes 4 to 6 weeks to show results." Dr. Parker looked at the timeline. When did treatment start? October 1st. And when did Mr. Harrison's first major emotional breakthrough occur? Walsh checked his notes. October 5th, the session with his daughter. Dr. Parker pulled up the CT scan from September 27th before treatment began. Then the one from October 1st, the day treatment started. She looked at them side by side, then at the October 15th scan. The tumor was 13.8 centimeters on September 27th, she said slowly. But look at the October 1st scan. It's 12.1 centimeters. The tumor started shrinking before we began chemotherapy. The room went silent. "That's impossible," Walsh said. "Is it Mr. Harrison started talking, really talking, on September 26th. His daughter confronted him about the journal. They had their first honest conversation in years. His stress levels dropped immediately." Walsh stared at the images. "You're saying talking shrunk the tumor?" "I'm saying his body has been trying to fight this tumor for 21 years, but chronic stress suppressed his immune system. The moment he released that emotional burden, his immune system woke up. It started doing what it was designed to do. The revelation changed everything and nothing. The tumor was shrinking, but Jim was still dying, just slower than before. Treatment continued through October and November. The chemotherapy made Jim's hair thin, though at 68, he didn't have much to lose. The radiation left burns on his shoulder that had to be dressed daily. But the physical side effects were nothing compared to the emotional excavation happening in Dr. Parker's office week after week. Jim peeled back layers of silence. He talked about his father's funeral, which he'd attended drunk because it was the only way he could face the grief. He talked about the day Emily was born, how he'd held her for hours in the hospital, terrified he'd break her. He talked about Rachel's cancer diagnosis, how he'd gone to the hospital parking lot and vomited after the doctor delivered the news. "I thought I was protecting you," he told Rachel during a November session. "I thought if I carried everything, you wouldn't have to." "But I was carrying things too," Rachel said. "I was carrying your silence, your distance, the fear that someday you'd just disappear and I'd never know why." Emily flew back and forth between Portland and Seattle, trying to maintain her caseload while being present for family therapy. On November 12th, she brought her ex-husband into a session via video call. Tell them why we divorced, she asked him. Mark, a software engineer she'd married at 32, looked uncomfortable on the screen. Because you couldn't let me in. You'd built walls so high I couldn't climb them. And I realized you'd learned that from someone. Emily looked at Jim. I learned it from you, Dad. You taught me that love means suffering alone, that needing help is weakness, that vulnerability is failure. I'm sorry, Jim said, the words coming easier now after weeks of practice. I know you are, but sorry doesn't undo 28 years of damage. I have to unlearn everything you taught me. I'm in therapy twice a week, trying to figure out how to let people love me. Jim's face was wet. I taught you wrong. Yes, but you're learning different now, so maybe I can too. By late November, Jim had regained 15 pounds. His pain levels dropped from a constant 8 or 9 to a manageable 5 or 6. He could lift his left arm almost to shoulder height, something he hadn't been able to do in 5 years. On December 1st, Dr. Walsh ordered another CT scan. The tumor measured 7.2 centimeters, a 48% reduction from its peak size of 13.8 centimeters. The necrotic core had shrunk. The inflammation had resolved. The tendrils extending into the brachial plexus had retracted. Walsh called a meeting with Jim, Rachel, Emily, and Dr. Parker. This is unprecedented, Walsh said, rotating the three-dimensional reconstruction on his tablet. I've been a surgeon for 26 years. I've never seen a desmoid tumor respond this dramatically to treatment, especially not this quickly. What does this mean for surgery? Emily asked. It means the surgery is significantly safer than it would have been 3 months ago. Paralysis risk is now about 20% instead of 50%. Mortality risk is under 10% instead of 25%. Recurrence risk is around 40% instead of 60%. But, Rachel heard the hesitation in his voice, but the tumor is still shrinking. If this trend continues, it might shrink enough that we could perform a much less invasive surgery, maybe even avoid surgery altogether if it becomes small enough and stops growing. Jim leaned forward. How long would that take? Another 3 months, maybe 4. We'd continue the current protocol and monitor monthly. So I could wait, Jim said slowly. Keep doing therapy and chemo and hope the tumor keeps shrinking. Yes, or I could have surgery now while it's smaller and safer than it's ever been. Also, yes. Jim looked at Rachel, then Emily. What do you think? Rachel spoke first. I vote wait. You're doing so well. Why risk surgery if we don't have to? Emily nodded. I agree. Keep going with what's working. But Jim was shaking his head. I vote surgery. The room went quiet. Dad, why? Emily asked. You're healing. Your body is finally fighting back. 'Cause I've waited 21 years, Jim said, his voice steady. I'm done waiting. I'm done living with this thing inside me. I'm done wondering if every headache means it's growing again. I want it out. Walsh studied him. Even knowing the risks, especially knowing the risks, because for the first time in my life, I'm not choosing safety over change. I'm not choosing silence over action. He looked at Rachel. You told me to fight. This is me fighting. Rachel's eyes filled, but she nodded. When Jim asked Walsh, we'd need 2 weeks to prepare. Pre-surgical workup, cardiac clearance, blood work. I want you as strong as possible going in. December 20th, Jim said. Let's do it, December 20th. The 2 weeks before surgery passed in a strange blur. Jim continued therapy daily, but the sessions shifted from excavating trauma to preparing for what came next. What scares you most about the surgery? Dr. Parker asked on December 10th. Waking up without my arm working, being dependent, and what scares you most about dying? Jim was quiet, not being there for Rachel and Emily, leaving them with nothing but silence and regret. You've already given them more than that. You've given them honesty, vulnerability, the real you. On December 17th, Jim, Rachel, and Emily drove to the Columbia River Gorge, the same overlook where Jim had proposed 45 years earlier. It was cold, the sky heavy with clouds threatening snow. You Send Me played on the car radio, their song, always their song. If I don't make it, Jim started. Don't, Emily said from the back seat. Let me say this. If I don't wake up, I want you both to know you're the reason I'm still here. 21 years of pain couldn't kill me because I had you. Rachel took his hand. You're going to wake up. Maybe. But if I don't, promise me something. Don't let my silence be my legacy. Tell people to talk to their families. Tell them not to wait 21 years. We promise, Emily said, her voice breaking. They stood at the overlook until the cold drove them back to the car. On the drive home, Jim told stories he'd never told before, about his father, about the day he'd realized he loved Rachel, about the night Emily was born, how he had counted her fingers and toes 17 times to make sure she was perfect. Why didn't you ever tell me these things before? Emily asked. Because I didn't know how. And by the time I learned, I was too ashamed of all the years I'd wasted. December 20th arrived cold and clear. Jim woke at 5:30, showered carefully around the IV port in his arm, and dressed in the clothes Rachel had brought, sweatpants, a T-shirt. The hospital gown would come soon enough. They arrived at the hospital at 6:15. Pre-op was efficient and terrifying. Nurses checking vitals. Anesthesiologist explaining the process. Dr. Walsh going over the surgical plan one more time. We'll remove as much of the tumor as we safely can, Walsh said. If I encounter the subclavian artery and can't safely dissect around it, I'll have to make a choice, leave some tumor behind, or risk arterial damage. Take it all out, Jim said, whatever it takes. At 7:15, they wheeled Jim toward the surgical theater. Rachel and Emily walked alongside the gurney as far as they were allowed. I love you, Rachel said, holding his right hand. I've always loved you, even in the silence. I love you too, Jim said. I should have said it more. Emily leaned down and kissed his forehead. Thank you for fighting, Dad. Thank you for coming home. The doors to the surgical wing closed between them. Rachel and Emily sat in the waiting room, holding hands, not speaking. Every 2 hours, a nurse emerged with updates. He's stable, proceeding as planned, still going well. At 1:47 in the afternoon, 6.5 hours into an 8-hour surgery, Dr. Walsh emerged, still in scrubs, face serious. Rachel stood so fast she nearly fell. Emily caught her. Rachel couldn't finish. He's alive, Walsh said quickly, but we have a complication. The waiting room seemed to tilt. Emily's grip on Rachel's arm tightened. The tumor was more adherent to the subclavian artery than the scans showed. I can attempt complete removal, but it risks arterial rupture. Or I can leave a portion attached and accept an 85% recurrence rate. What would Jim want? Rachel whispered. He told me to take it all out, whatever it takes. But this exceeds what we discussed. Legally, I need your consent. Rachel closed her eyes. After 45 years of marriage, after 21 years of watching her husband suffer in silence, the choice was hers. Take it out, she said. All of it? Jim Harrison spent 21 years believing that being strong meant suffering alone. He thought hiding his pain was protecting his family, but silence became the weight that nearly crushed them all. When that tumor was finally removed, it wasn't just diseased tissue the surgeons cut away. It was 2 decades of unspoken fear, swallowed pride, and love that never found words. The real miracle wasn't that Jim survived the surgery. It was that his family survived the silence and found their way back to each other. How many of us carry our own hidden tumors, not physical ones, but emotional weights? We've been shouldering alone for years, the things we don't tell our spouses because we don't want to burden them, the pain we hide from our children because we think that's what strength looks like. Jim learned the hardest way possible that silence doesn't protect the people we love. It isolates them. It steals years we can never get back. But he also learned it's never too late to speak, never too late to let the people who love you actually see you. What's the one thing you've been carrying alone that you need to finally share? Have you ever kept silent to protect someone, only to realize later it caused more harm? Share your story in the comments below.